misguide him. And whomever Allah misguides, no one can guide him to the straight path. And I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah, and Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is his messenger and his slave. We begin with the ayah that talks about الشهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. That the month of Ramadan in which Quran was revealed on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it was revealed as a guidance to the mankind. Why this ayah is so important? That when we talk about the revelation of Quran, we have to go back to the first ayah that was revealed on Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which was اقرأ بسم ربك الذي خلق. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to read in the name of your Lord. When we think about it a little bit in that aspect, why was it not about the prayer? Why wasn't it not about azkar? Why was it not about remembering of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's not that those things were not important. They were super important as well, or if not more. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to mention in that specific ayah, is that at that point you have to understand the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That he wasn't in his early stages of his life or his middle stages of his life. He was in the second, third part of his life, or the third part of his life. And at that time, when we think about it from our lives, we think of it in that way, like after 25 to 30, like our career should be settled. Like our education should be done. We should be moving towards just progression, not necessarily finding something new. But at that time, Prophet was given the revelation, that read. That at that time, Prophet was asked to learn, Prophet was asked to understand. Up till that point, throughout his life, was just a preparation to that responsibility that he was going to be given. And it was that heavy responsibility that he needed to prepare for that time. So when we put it into perspective in our lives, when we put it in the perspective of Ramadan, when do we start thinking of preparation? Either on the first day of Ramadan or before. That if Prophet had to, kind of practice his life, Prophet had to practice not making any mistakes. And he was the purest of the purest souls. So when he was given that revelation at his age, when he was already, past like a certain middle age part, then he was still asked to learn. So that gives us an idea that our learning is never done. That when we open Quran, we can understand the meaning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can understand the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Quran is not only for a specific group of people or just some specific scholars that they are able to read. But Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. It talks about it, it talks to everybody, what they are going through. It doesn't just talk about one aspect of it, but it talks about everything in our lives. When we think of Islam, it's not just how to pray, it's a complete way of life. From Quran and Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying and how to practice it. When it was talked about how to make adhkar, how to pray, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to show them how to pray. And that's where it leads to. When we open Quran, we are communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about it, He's also talking about different ways of our lives as well. Whether it's how we treat our elders, whether it's how we treat our children, whether it's a matter of understanding how you divide your property. Those are the nuances that are described, those are the smallest aspects that are also described in the Quran. When we understand it, the more we realize how we're going to, completely set up our life based on Quran and Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even in the ibadahs that Allah has put, we have to learn that part where Allah has even given us those ibadahs, even there is blessings for us in that. So when we talk about the ibadahs, if we start just taking the pillars of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam, if we start taking those ibadahs and start seeing the reflection of, first part, the spirituality part, or the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the religious part, which is always talked about with different scholars. I want to mention the other 2 aspects of it, inshallah, in this will done. The second aspect that comes in is the spirituality, the amount of time you need to reflect it, the amount of time you need for yourself, where you're not worrying about what's going on in the world. Where you take a break from everything that's going on in this world to reflect. Because Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to go to Cave of Hira just to contemplate, just to understand what's going on in his life and what he needs to do to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. And he was the purest of the pure souls. So he never made any kind of mistakes in his life. But when he was asking for istighfar from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he was asking Allah for forgiveness, because he knew without Allah's mercy, without Allah's ability of His attributes of Rahman and Rahim, nobody could get to Jannah. So he kept asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. He kept making those istighfar, he kept making his prayers longer and longer. Whether it was in congregation or whether it was alone. Because when we are praying to Allah, we are trying to build our connection. It's not just about getting something done. It's not just about, oh, we stand in prayer, 4 rakats in or 2 rakats in, whatever prayer we are praying, and then we are done, we just move on, go back to our life. But trying to have that concentration. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَارْكَعُوا مَعَ الرَّاكِعِينَ. Be steadfast in your prayer, practice regular charity, and bow down with those who bow down. Being steadfast in the important aspect. When we say Allahu Akbar, we are saying Allah is great. And then immediately as soon as we start reciting Surah Fatiha, we start making the dua to Allah, Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim, guide me to the straight path. Then we start immediately asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us through that path. Because without the mercy of Allah, without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we cannot do anything. And that kind of connects with how we make our du'as. That when we think about making du'as, how do we understand whether our du'as are accepted or not? How do we understand when we're in difficult situation, when we're calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responding us back? So one of the scholars described it as soon as you raise your hand or you use your tongue to utter those words in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah think that Allah has already accepted your du'as. Allah has already accepted your words, because without the will of Allah, you cannot do those. Without the will of Allah, you cannot take another step. So if Allah has given you the will, Allah has given you the ability to do that, that means Allah wants you to connect with Him. So even when we are in difficulty, that's how we are able to understand. And that's when we think about it, our prayers get longer. Our qiyam and our qiyam gets longer. We start to doing a lot more sawm, we start to do a lot more fasting when we're going through difficulty. We start making more azkar. Just think about that example. If you're traveling in an airplane, as soon as you hit turbulence, the first thing that immediately comes in, you're like, let me make dua. Because I don't know what's going to happen. You start making the du'as, you start making the azkar when you're in difficulty. So we have to understand, even in the difficult times, that is the way we are able to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sahaba used to think that the difficult time is the way to connect with Allah. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is loving somebody, He gives them the test. To see what their actions are after that. So when we are given some sort of a difficult situation, whether it's physical, whether it's financial or mental, each person is going through something. In this room, it might be your brother sitting right next to you, but you don't know what they're going through. They might be in the biggest part, but they might not have peace at home. They might have, they might not have financial ability, but they have physical ability. Or if they have both, they might have something going on mentally. They're in the state of depression. So when we think about that, Allah has given everybody some sort of a test. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. That every human being is given a test, a labor, a struggle, and turmoil in their life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see what they do in that instance. And the scholar kind of described it as that to understand whether the difficulty is a test or a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it connects you towards Allah, then it's a test. Because the difficulty that you have in your life is supposed to connect you to Allah. The difficulty that you have in your life and the struggles that you're going through is supposed to bring you more closer. But if it takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's a punishment. And we are at loss if we get away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the more we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we understand His words, the more we understand Him in the reflection of that we love Allah. The more we realize each one of the blessings that Allah has put in our ibadas are for us as well. So coming back to the point of the prayer that we started talking about. Second aspect is taking out the time where you reflect upon yourself, where you reflect upon where you are. And what's your ultimate goal? What's your ultimate test that's going to be given on the Day of Judgment? Is the world, the few days that we are living here in this world, is this the ultimate or the one that we are going to get in the hereafter? What is our ultimate test? We have to keep that focus on our mind. When we are going through, like everybody has gone through their education, when they are going through it, they realize that final exam is the most important. You don't just give up your final exam to do better in the smaller test. You do better in the final exam. You start preparing for those. So our final exam is on the Day of Judgment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful that He gives the test based on our abilities. Based on what we have in our life. It's not a standardized test that everybody gets the same questions and everybody is being asked the same things. We're being asked on the things that we have in our lives. That if somebody was given more financial ability, Allah is going to ask them more about what did they do with their ability. If somebody was asked about their physical ability, if they have if they're not disabled from any sort of disability, Allah is going to ask them, what did you do with your hands? What did you do with your eyesight? What did you do with your mouth? Whether you use your feet to stand in Qiyam or not. That's what Allah is going to ask us. So we have to realize, while Ramadan is coming up, and while we're trying to prepare ourselves, are we ready? If this was our last moment, are we ready to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That when we reflect upon this part of it, that what our ibadahs look like, what our ibadahs look like in secret. Because when we think about it historically, our head is where the crown was placed. Like the kings used to have a crown on their head. The noble people, the people with the financial ability used to have something on their head. That's why we put our kufi and our cap on our head, because all of our attitude, all of our thinking is in our head. All of our critical thinking is in our head. Because we think that's our most precious ability, right? But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to pray, what happens? We touch our forehead to the ground. And then we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because wherever we think, okay, this is my ability. This is who I am. When we start thinking that, Allah is like, come back to me and start praying. That there is a higher power who has created everything. It didn't just happen on accident. That Allah has put everything together in that way. But when you're in sujood, psychologically we think we have to be strong. That we have to portray that level of strength where other people are like, okay, this brother, whatever they're going through, he has so much strength. But in front of Allah, if you're making a dua, if you're making a azkar, if you're crying in front of Allah, that's the most beloved. That when you're submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you're submitting your emotions as well. So you can cry in front of Allah, that's your first line of defense when you're going through any kind of mental health issues. It could be depression, it could be just sadness, it could be a loss of something. So when you are in front of Allah and you're crying in front of Allah, Allah gives that sabr. Allah gives the ability to handle those situations. Allah gives us something better in that regard. And in the prayer, when you're standing in that and coming to the physical aspect of the benefit of the prayer. So we have to think about that, the physical aspect of the benefit. That every day, 5 times, you're supposed to take out 5 to 10 minutes to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're supposed to stand, you're supposed to go to ruku, you're supposed to go to sajda, you're supposed to physically move yourself, take out yourself from that environment where you are. So if you were just working from home and sitting on a chair for 8 hours a day for that work, the ibadah is providing you, get out of the chair, pray, take out your time, physically move. The exercise is within our religion. They will physically move. That is the benefit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in our prayers. That when we are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are also getting the benefit from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we're eating, if we start with the name of Allah, we're getting the blessings of Allah. So that's how we understand, okay, we have to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of these blessings, that all of the things that I'm already supposed to do, all of the things that I'm already thinking of doing. When we think about lunch, or when we think about food, everybody starts automatically thinking what I'm going to have for dinner, or what I'm going to cook, or somebody's going to cook for me. Whatever food I'm going to get from the restaurant, that's what the mind comes to be. But if we start with the name of Allah, if we start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that's what it takes to put barakah in that food. That's what it takes to have the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the thing that you were already supposed to. أقول قولي هذا فاستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم صل على محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. The point of this khutbah that I want to mention is all the struggles that we go through and connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that Allah has mentioned أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. That verily in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the heart finds peace. When you're doing the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you're connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, heart can find peace. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give that strength. That whatever you are going through, whatever challenges you have, you might have talked to somebody about it or not. But in those specific challenges, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows about it. What Allah is waiting for you is to ask Allah for that strength. He's waiting for you to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because there is a hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that talks about it, that if you need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala something, you can even ask as little as a shoelace. So realize this hadith, that if you don't have a shoelace, you can still survive. This hadith kind of talks about that the smallest thing, you still have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is not waiting that you only ask for big things. You have to ask Allah not on our ability what we can ask. You have to ask Allah based on His ability to give. MashaAllah. He can do anything. When we think about it, that we can ask Allah anything, whatever is going on in our life. When we ask Him, then we realize, okay, we have to ask Him based on His ability and what He can give it to us. How He can make our affairs better. How He can make all of our challenges better. We just compare Him. Because for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, that it is. That's how it is. That is the greatness of Allah. That's what we keep mentioning in our prayers, Allahu Akbar. That's what we keep talking about it. That we keep mentioning the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you are doing that ibadah to Allah, when you are connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it talks about rahmati wasiyat kulla shay, and my mercy encompasses all things. That's mentioned in the Quran. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mercy in all of the aspects of our life. It's not just one aspect of the other where Allah's mercy is there, but Allah's mercy is in everything. Even in our challenges, that we're getting the ibadah, we're getting all of the benefits and all of the good deeds through that. When you're thinking of even coming to prayer, when you're praying in congregation, even each one of the steps has the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That there's a hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that he says that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam talk about it, that if somebody is praying in congregation and they make wudu and they take each one of those steps to get to the prayer, so each one of the steps is going to be blessed, and each one of those steps they're going to get the blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're going to get one bad deed removed from them. So it's not just about, okay, you're thinking of praying in congregation or you're praying alone, but when you're praying together, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you one blessing and removing one of the bad deeds that you've done. And Allah multiplies it by so many folds. That in the same hadith it's also mentioned that your prayer in congregation is multiplied by 25 times or more bi'idhnillah. That Allah isn't counting when you're doing a good deed that it's one against one. That you do one good deed and then it's counted as one good deed. But Allah multiplies that by many folds. That Allah has tipped the scale towards us as long as we take our steps towards Allah. As long as we make our ibadahs better, as long as we make our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better, Allah multiplies those. But what happens when we do a bad deed? What does Allah do? That it's only counted as one. The hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that specifically talked about this in a way that if a believer does a good deed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked the angel to write it right away in your deed of books, in your book of deeds. But when a believer does a bad deed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked the angel to hold the pen for a moment. And in some narrations talked about it that hold the pen for a few hours. That if the believer asks for forgiveness with the goodness of heart, with the openness of heart, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have it removed as if it was never written in the first place. Alhamdulillah, this is the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the ability of Allah's Rahman and Rahim. That when He's being forgiven, He's being merciful, that He's multiplying our good deeds. But when we think about our lives, even we cannot repay back for one of the bread that we take just sitting in right now. We cannot repay it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we need to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to ask for ourselves. When we're making donations, what happens? We always think what's going to happen for the other person. For the right reasons, yeah, that's a good thing to think. But when you're thinking in that matter, you also have to think that when you're giving a donation or when you're doing that, rather it's for ourselves. That when you give $1 or whatever number of dollars that you give, that it's for ourselves because we want to get to Jannah. We want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be merciful to us. That's what we are doing in terms of giving donation. These hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that talks about it, protect yourself from hellfire, even by giving a piece of date shared. The piece of date was specifically mentioned because at that time Sahaba did not have enough. They were going through a lot of struggles, a lot of difficult times, that they did not have enough food. Sometimes if they were fasting, they did not have enough food to open their fast with other than just a piece of date. And if somebody would ask them, they would give that away as well. Because in their mind, their love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was a lot more. They were like, we need to get to Jannah. That's our ultimate test. Like, my next meal is not my ultimate test, but my actual goal is getting connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in our life, we are going to make different kind of mistakes. As human beings, we are making different mistakes in our lives. Hopefully unintentionally. But even the ones that we are making intentionally, if we change and connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah forgive those as well. What Allah is waiting for from us is that we turn back towards Him. We turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of our ibadah. And with Ramadan coming up, what's the better time to prepare before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets so much more merciful in Ramadan. A lot of people are forgiven in Ramadan. When you think about your parents, right? When you think about your friend, somebody who you care a lot, or your sibling, would you not go when they're really happy and ask them something? Or would you go when they're not happy? That's the example you can take. And remember, Allah loves us more than the 70 mothers. But we still need to take a step. That when we are showing, we start preparing ahead of time, that we start changing our ibadah, that we start changing our habits. That what we are doing right now, if we are doing a bad deed, and as soon as I say intentional mistakes, we automatically know what's our biggest intentional mistake. What the mistakes, we don't have to say it out loud. That these are our mistakes. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can keep it quiet. Allah already knows, and you can ask for forgiveness for that. But the preparation for Ramadan is so much more important. Everybody thinks about it as a new year, 1st of January, new year, that they want to change their life. But with Ramadan, when all of the things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful, and all of the things are being forgiven, would we not change our lives back? Would we not change our lives to something better? And connecting with Allah. Would we not turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and showing that even in our difficult time, that's what our love means to Allah. That we're not just thinking of it in a fear way, that if I don't do this, if I don't pray, that I'm going to go to hell. But that I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that much. There was a story that comes to mind, and inshallah I'll conclude it with that. There was a child who had Down syndrome and praying in the prayer. And every rakah that, Imam would talk in Sirat al-Mustaqim and then go to Surah Fatih, he's like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I love you. Like, he wasn't able to contemplate what he was doing. The point of it is not that we start doing it, that habit, but the point of it is that even in his senses, that he was able to connect with Allah in a way that he understands. When we are praying, when we are saying, Subhan Rabbil A'la, Subhan Rabbil Azim, we're showing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how great He is. That we are able to connect with Him. That we are able to do all the ibadahs that Allah has instructed it to us. And we start making those ibadahs better. We start having more concentration. Waqimu salah, be steadfast in your prayer. And practice regular charity and bow down with those who bow down. And inshallah, I'll mention last thing, we have an organization here at Nerdy trying to raise funds for women's shelter. So before you leave, make sure to donate as much as you can. Because we have to start practicing regular charity. So start with your masajid. Start with, if you come to IMAAM Center, donate as regularly as you can. Like, be on their monthly donation list. And then start donating to other organizations like Iknari, Helping Hand, and all the other organizations as well. So before you leave, make sure to do good deeds and give something to charity in terms of that. Because those women who are going to be helped through these shelters, we're going to get help regardless. It is for ourselves. That we want to get the blessings of Allah. That we want to get the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in that essence, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us and guide us to the straight path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to do more good deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to get to Ramadan and get forgiven from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت اللهم اعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر المسلمين في كل مكان اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب القبر وأعوذ بك من فتنة المسيح الدجال وأعوذ بك من فتنة المحيا والممات اللهم إني أعوذ بك من المأثم والمغرم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب القبر وقنا عذاب الحشر وقنا عذاب الميزان رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله الذي يذكركم واشكروه يزيدكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم واتقوه يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا. أقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
لا إله إلا الله. Fill in the gaps here in your lives. Istaw, istaw, istaw. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين